Get ready to hear the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about the United States healthcare system. With your host of the Medical Truth Podcast, James Egidio.
Hi, I'm James Egidio, your host of the Medical Truth Podcast, the podcast that tells the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth about the American healthcare system. Over the last 40 years, technological advances with devices such as smartphones, televisions, and computers used with Wi-Fi routers and modems have made significant strides in making our lives easy and convenient, as well as dependent on these devices. However, with that convenience comes consequences, so much so that it takes a toll on our overall health and well-being in the way we feel and function. My guest is referred to as a building biologist. It is an honor and a pleasure to have on the Medical Truth Podcast my guest, Mr. Oram Miller. Oram, how are you doing today? Welcome to the Medical Truth Podcast.
Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. Just share with the listeners and viewers a little bit about who you are and what you do with Create Healthy Homes.
So I am a certified building biology environmental consultant and electromagnetic radiation specialist, certified by the Building Biology Institute, which is headquartered in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where the executive director lives, Michael Kahn. And we are an affiliate organization of a German-based institute called they have a German name. It's the Baubiologie Institute, and that's German for building biology. And sustainability in their name. So that organization came into being during the rebuilding of Europe after World War II in the 1940s and 50s. And in that decade, when American materials and practices were implemented in the rapid rebuilding of the housing stock after World War II, issues developed with the residents there in homes, air quality issues and electromagnetic fields. And so a group of sensitive individuals, residents, physicians, engineers, people who are in the building trade, got together and architects and discovered that there were sources of toxicity in the homes based on the building methods that have been used compared to or contrasting with the post and beam and daub and wattle construction methods that have been used in Europe for centuries. Our methods are a little different, stick built with fiberglass installation. So the walls were not hygroscopic, they were not breathable. If moisture got into the walls, it didn't dry out in sufficient time to avoid mold. So mold was one of the outcomes. And then when petroleum-based products were implemented in paints and adhesives and carpet padding and carpet backing, then the outgassing from those products caused people who were sensitive to become ill from outgassing. So, and then electromagnetic fields was also discovered, magnetic fields and electric fields from house wiring, and then in the later decades, radio frequencies, we'll get to that, and even dirty electricity, which is magnetic and electric fields at higher frequencies. So all of that created, for some people, not everyone, a toxic soup in their homes, and certain people reacted adversely to that and developed symptoms, respiratory symptoms, but also fatigue, ringing in the ears, brain fog, memory loss, difficulty sleeping, difficulty concentrating. These are symptoms that I hear because I focus now exclusively on electromagnetic fields in my practice. Right. And so out of that came this organization called the Building Biology Institute over there. And one of their graduates, and so they're still in existence, and their website is buildingbiology.com. And one of their graduates, Helmut Zia, an architect, brought that knowledge in the mid-1980s to London, tried to get that knowledge going in England, didn't have as much success as he was hoping for after 1 year. So he moved to Florida, and he met an American woman, married her, and started that process here in the US. And he met with success. There were people who came and took his training, who then ended up teaching for him. And he had some people from Germany come over and help teach. So out of that came what he called the International Institute for Building Biology and Ecology. And I am a graduate of that program. And I've been doing this for decades. And so I learned chemical outgassing, mold in indoor air quality and mold assessment, water damage, and electromagnetic fields. Those are the three pillars. And I did that for many years in the upper Midwest in Minneapolis. And then 13 years ago, I decided to move to California, where I am now in Los Angeles. And I decided at that time to not focus on indoor air quality or mold. I didn't care for it as much as a practitioner. And there are good people here who I could refer to, and I do. And I decided to just focus on what I really love most, which is EMFs. So that's what I've been doing for the last 13 years. And so what we focus on in the EMF portion of the building biology profession is magnetic fields, electric fields, radio frequencies, and dirty electricity, which I'll go into. And I'm a teacher now for my profession for the last 10 years. I'm an adjunct faculty member, not a senior member because I'm not an engineer, but I work with engineers. I was trained by engineers, and I'm on the faculty. And so what we focus on is magnetic fields from house wiring, electric fields from house wiring, and these are due to current on wires and also voltage on the wire. So I have here a piece of wire. So this is what a circuit looks like inside of a home.
Oh,
this is the hot wire.
Right.
This is the neutral wire, and this is the ground wire. Current goes from the breaker panel through the circuit in the wall to a switch, and then when you flip the switch on, it goes up. So there'll be another. So if this is the box where the current circuit comes into, and here's the switch. Here are the switches, and then out of that you'll have multiple branch circuits that go up to the lighting loads, for instance. And so current will go on the hot wire, and what happens, James, is you'll have current flowing through this, and whenever current goes through a wire, there's a magnetic field that circles around it in a clockwise fashion. So every electrician is taught that if you lay your hand out and you point your fingers to the left here for the right hand with the palm up, the thumb points in the direction of the current flow. So it comes from behind me to switches in front of me. So this is the circuit that goes from the panel to the switches. And so I'm showing the direction of the load that's on. My thumb is pointing on this hot wire in that direction. So there will be around me a magnetic field that is invisible, silent, and odorless that goes right through the wall into the living space from that hot wire, except it's not measured there with a Gauss meter, for instance. It's not measured there because once that current gets to the light bulbs up in the ceiling, that's the load. And then the current goes through the filament, if it's an incandescent bulb, and comes back down on the white wire called the neutral.
Okay.
And so you're starting all over again with another journey of electricity from the source to a load, or to the destination, which is the panel back behind me. So you have two wires carrying current in opposite directions, each with the right-hand rule, meaning that now, if I was to go to the light bulb and turn around and look back at where I'm standing now, it would also be a right-hand turn. But if I come back here and stay where I am and I see the right-hand turning of the magnetic field around the hot, and the current comes back on the neutral, it's counterclockwise. It's going the other way.
Sounds like it kind of produces like a halo effect around the whoever.
Yeah, but the halo disappears because the two fields. So if I have a clock, well, it's counterclockwise to the camera, but there's clockwise to the camera, rotating that way. But the other one has a center over here going the other way, this way. And so if I take those two centers, those two epicenters of the rotating fields, and I bring them together, like you have in any standard wire, those two fields are now on top of each other. And if they're equal, then they will be canceling each other. They'll cancel each other. Now, how do I know if they're equal? Well, then I work with an electrician, and we can measure in the junction box where the switches are, and he'll open them up. He'll pull the switches out and pull the wires out, and I've got gloves on, and I hand him this, or he's got one of these, similar to this, and he'll clamp around the hot wire while the light's on, and he'll say, "Oh, there's 3.2 amps going up to that light.
Right.
So then we measure the neutral, and it's 3.2 coming back. So
Right.
those two magnetic fields are the same size, so they perfectly cancel each other, except a little bit that comes out for a few inches because there's a little separation of a half an inch in here. So they're offset just enough for a little bit of a magnetic field, but that's normal. Now, if those neutrals, if you have two circuits coming into that switch box, which is okay, but if the electrician doesn't follow the National Electric Code, which says you don't mix those neutrals, and he goes ahead and puts them together into the same wire nut, now you have a situation where that current will go back on both neutrals, and now you don't have the full 3.2 amps on that neutral, you have less, because the remainder is going the other way on another neutral. And now you have a wiring error, and now you will have a magnetic field in the room. I just saw it yesterday at a house here in Los Angeles. And in that room, when you turn the lights on, the magnetic field comes out of the wall into the living space where people are. That when the lights on. Now, when you turn the lights off, it goes away. So there are EMFs that we have in the daytime, and then a different set at night, or some of the same remain, but others drop off. We have indoor sources of EMFs that we have control over, and we can manage even in a rental. I was in a rental yesterday.
Mm-hmm.
And outdoor sources of EMFs that we don't have as much control over, or any control over. All we can do is shield them. And magnetic fields cannot be shielded, but radio frequencies can. And then we have people who are sensitive living in the same house as people who are not sensitive. And the sensitive person calls me up and say, we need to, I need some help here. And when I get there, I say, well, we need to cut back on your radio frequency use. You need to switch over to a landline telephone, and you need to use hardwired Ethernet cables for your computer and stop using Wi-Fi, and then you'll feel better. And then they do, and then they call me back and say, yeah, I feel better now. But their husband, he's not on board. He wants Wi-Fi all over the house. And so I have to find a happy medium or a compromise that works.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So let me ask you, you mentioned different types of frequencies. You mentioned dirty electricity. You mentioned this electromagnetic fields. I wanted to kind of dissect a little bit about each one of those and,
Sure.
and where they're found in the home. So, you hear all this sentiment about phones and Wi-Fi's and all that. So I just kind of want to, like I said, dissect these different types of frequencies. So let's unpack that a little bit.
Okay. Good question. And because now we need to talk about fun. So I'm giving you sort of an introduction of what our world is like, and
sure,
as a practitioner. Okay, so the first two of the four EMFs that we recognize in the building biology profession, which again are magnetic fields from house wiring and overhead power lines, electric fields from house wiring, a little bit from overhead power lines. And then the third one is the basket category called radio frequencies, which includes all wireless devices, cell phones, transmitters and receivers. This is a transmitter as well as a receiver, as opposed to a radio, which is just a receiver. You see? So there's a difference between these two. Both of them receive, but only this one transmits. So, and it's the transmission of radio frequencies that is harmful from cell phones. And they transmit all the time, not constantly. Well, actually, in an iPhone, the Bluetooth is constantly transmitting. But there are intermittent transmissions, which I'll get into, from the 6 different antennas that are in every cell phone. Then you have the device that it's transmitting to or connecting to within the house, which is the Wi-Fi router. So many people have routers that have Wi-Fi enabled. You can disable it in most cases, not in all. And so that's putting out invisible, silent, odorless radio frequencies in that room, which then go through walls and you can connect to it in another room. Then you have the Bluetooth between a cordless mouse and keyboard with the computer. So they're talking. So they're transmitting the Bluetooth, talking to each other, and so on. So that's radio frequencies. And then the last category is dirty electricity, which is a sort of a colloquial term that's used by the lay public. The term used by the industry is EMI, electromagnetic interference. In my profession, we have recently started calling it microsurge electrical pollution, which sort of defines it. So it basically didn't exist 60 years ago. and before. It only came about when certain devices were introduced into our electronics that basically do certain things like dimmer switches on for lights.
Right.
Also, these lower wattage, lower electricity consuming bulbs, light bulbs. So incandescent light bulbs literally are very inefficient, and literally only 10% of the electricity that goes into that light bulb, the incandescent light bulb that we've had for 100 years, produces the light. That's as efficient as Edison could get it after 10 years of his own research back in the 1900s. And so he came up with a tungsten filament, and the best he could do, that's survived all this time and still is in use today, 100 years later. 10% of that electricity produces the light, 90% is wasted as heat. That's why they're so hot right around them. Now, the newer generation of light-emitting diodes, or LEDs, and compact fluorescent lamps, or CFLs, are not, it's the reverse. 90% of the electricity is used for the light, and only 10% is heat. So the electricity consumption is much less. They're energy efficient, and so they're good for the planet. So there's a trend towards energy efficient light bulbs. The problem is they operate at different voltages than 120 volts, which is the voltage, the pressure of electricity that are in the circuits that are in the wall. So in North America, every circuit in North America is at 120 volts, alternating current. And in Europe, it's 240 volts, double. And we're 60 cycles per second in terms of the sine wave, and they're 50 cycles per second. Now, that 120 volts is called line voltage. And all incandescent bulbs were designed by Edison 100 years ago to operate straight off 120 volts. No need to change that. No dirty electricity. No. Right. Okay, now, these compact fluorescent bulbs are just taking a long tube of fluorescent bulb, and then they compact it, and they make the glass tube a lot thinner, and then they actually make it zigzag back and forth in the shape of a light bulb, and then put a glass over it or not, and then you screw that in, and that's your compact fluorescent bulb, and it glows. And that operates at a much higher voltage, 20,000 volts, I think. So there's a transformer that has to step that up. Or light-emitting diodes are lower than 120. They're like, 6 volts, 8, 9 volts. And so you need a transformer in either case. And there's not enough room to put a wire-wound transformer. So they use a switch mode power supply, which is a chip-based transformer, which works good in terms of changing the voltage up for CFLs or down for LEDs from 120, which is what comes in from the circuit. But these switch mode power supplies, and I know this is very confusing, produces a side effect, which is a hum. It's called dirty electricity, transient voltages, EMI, electromagnetic interference, that rides on the sine wave, and you have so you have these electric and magnetic fields at higher frequencies that come into the room through the wall, right through the plastic and right through your sheetrock into the room. Not only do you have that at 60 hertz, which I haven't discussed yet, that's electric fields, I'll come back to that, but the dirty electricity also comes into the room. It's just electric fields, primarily electric. We don't have magnetic fields from circuits at either, because of the cancellation that I mentioned, both at 60 hertz and higher frequencies. But the dirty electricity that people react to, because many of your viewers are people who are electrically sensitive, or they know about this and they've read about dirty electricity. Well, I'm telling you, dirty electricity is a field that comes into the room. It's primarily the electric field at higher frequencies. So our definition for our students and our practitioners in the building biology profession is that dirty electricity is simply defined as electric fields at higher frequencies than 60 cycles per second. And when you plug in an oscilloscope, and we teach our students how to do that, or you can plug in a meter, which looks like this. So this is a Stetzer meter, and there's a green wave meter that you can plug in, and you get a number here, and then you compare it to the numbers that are on the back. And then when you plug in one of their filters, this happens to be a green wave filter, then this number goes down. So that's how we, and you can also remove sources. That's another way, and perhaps a better way of eliminating dirty electricity in your home. And we also have whole house filter systems that can be installed from Sign Tamer and from Static USA, Static Shield in Montana, the Power Perfect box. So, and also from EMF Safe in Oregon that have automatic switches. You press a button and the electric fields go off where you sleep, and they have put the PQ filter into their boxes, which also reduces dirty electricity for the whole house. So I'm just giving you an overview of these EMFs, and the dirty electricity comes off of the wall through the sheetrock from the circuit, but it's from higher frequencies, from such sources as dimmer switches when they're on, compact fluorescent lights when they're on, energy efficient furnaces, pool pump motors, because I won't go into the details, but we now have energy efficiency requirements. We have devices that can reduce the consumption of electricity by a motor, for instance, and it has to do not the running of the motor, but the controlling of the motor. That's where we have variable speed drives or variable speed devices for furnaces, for instance. And I have clients who call me up and say they upgraded our furnace, they put in this new furnace that has a variable speed thing, and I can't be in the house anymore when that thing is on. I have no heat. The minute I turn that on, anywhere where I can be anywhere in the house, because dirty electricity goes all over the house on all the circuits to varying degrees, and even from house to house. Or a neighbor put solar panels on their roof, not my clients, not the sensitive one, but the neighbor. And during the day, my client can't be in their house because the dirty electricity comes in. And I've measured it. I've been in houses, James, where I get 1900. This thing maxes out at 2000, 1800, 1900 units. And I said, do you have solar panels? Because everywhere I go, in every house, every circuit, I'm getting that number. They say, no, I would have told you, but my neighbor does. And I can see through the window, go outside, look over the fence. There it is. And I recognize the brand. And then I happened to be in 4 of my clients' homes that had that phenomenon when it was in the winter, and it got dark while I was still there wrapping up 5, 6 o'clock and in the evening. And I went back and plugged this back in. It was 150.
Wow.
Just by the sun going down outside there, their solar panel system shut off, and their dirty inverter, stopped polluting that house and every house in the neighborhood served by the same utility transformer with dirty electricity.
Yeah.
So that's another way that it gets into your house from neighbors.
Yeah, it sounds like you can't escape any of this. I mean, you're talking even just regular household appliances from what it sounds like. And I'm sure with the advances in technology, some of these newer televisions, these smart TVs and all this other stuff is probably emitting a lot of that, correct?
Yeah, like a smart TV will emit primarily RF, a little bit of dirty electricity, but mostly RF. Which
Radio frequency. Yeah.
That's right.
RF,
I was in the house yesterday. There were 4 Samsung appliances transmitting radio frequencies from the stove, from the back of the stove, and they all have Wi-Fi symbols on them. The oven, the gas stove, a microwave, and the dishwasher. All 4 and GE. They all do this now. They all have, and another company has IQ technology. So we are able to disable that in the homes of people who are electrically sensitive in most cases.
Yeah.
But sometimes not. So
I want to get into that with you too. But before I do, I have a couple of other questions about that. So you mentioned something earlier about being sensitive to these different types of electrical frequencies. How do I know if I'm EMF sensitive? And if I am, what are some of the symptoms of that?
Okay. You'll know because you have a set of symptoms and you begin to realize, you read about it, you come across this understanding, and you learn that other people have a certain set of symptoms, and you say, oh, that sounds like me. And then so you start to do what they do, and that is you cut back on the use of your cell phone, or you put it in airplane mode and spend a few hours that way, or you get out of the house and you feel better. You come back in the house because there's still Wi-Fi, and you feel worse. And so you say, maybe your husband goes out to work, you're home, the woman, and you turn it off. You just unplug it, and you put this in airplane mode and make sure that Wi-Fi and Bluetooth are OFF, not connected, or still connected to the network in airplane mode, which can happen. These are details we have to get into. So you just make sure, or you just put it in another room, and you spend a few hours doing whatever you do, and then you realize you feel better. And then you take this out of airplane mode, turn the Wi-Fi back on, and your symptoms come back. That's one of the ways that you know. So again, the symptoms that I commonly hear are headaches, ringing in the ears, brain fog, numbness and tingling, memory loss, difficulty concentrating, difficulty sleeping, lethargy, chronic fatigue. These are the common symptoms that I hear from clients for radio frequency exposure. And by the way, I hear a different set of symptoms when people have predominant EMFs that are different. Like if everyone has radio frequencies today. Everyone has electric fields. Not everyone has magnetic fields. They're the least common EMF, but they're the most dangerous if you do have them, because they're lethal. Right. They have killed people. I have clients who have died of cancer.
From what field? What
magnetic?
Magnetic.
Yeah.
Where do magnetic fields come from again?
Okay. All right. So again, whenever you have current flowing through a wire, you'll have a magnetic field rotating around it. You generally don't have magnetic fields in homes because if the electrician followed the code, they will not have mixed the neutrals from two different circuits, for instance.
Okay.
Or they haven't mixed the neutrals and grounds, which is another thing I didn't mention. So you can have neutral to neutral wiring errors and neutral to ground wiring errors. And we look for those, and we have a whole protocol that we teach, that I help teach in the advanced EMF seminars, electromagnetic radiation seminars that we teach, EMR, beginning and advanced in our profession. And so we teach our students how to talk to electricians and work with them to guide them in how to open switches up and find those errors, and then reconfigure things the way they're supposed to be, according to code. And then you turn the lights on, and there's no magnetic field anymore in the room like there was before. That's the way it's supposed to be. But you can have magnetic fields coming in from outside. Like just this morning, I had a gentleman call me from Mississippi who I've worked with years ago, and he's moved, and he's having a lot of symptoms in his home. And it turns out he has transmission lines outside of his home that he didn't pay attention to when he moved in there. And he has a Gauss meter. I said, "Do you have a meter?" "I thought you did." He said, "Yeah, but I don't know how to use it." So I taught him how to use it this morning on the phone, and he walked out into his yard, and he's got magnetic fields there that come right through the wall of the house and the roof into his living space. Right. And it's affecting him. And that's one thing we can't do anything about.
Yeah.
There's no solution for that.
What are some of those magnetic fields from external sources outside of your house? Give me an example, or give the viewers and listeners an example of some of those things that would transmit those magnetic fields that are dangerous.
Power lines, overhead power lines, or even underground lines. So with power lines, they don't insulate them. And I asked why, and the technicians told me because the heat that's generated by the amount of current that flows on those things is so great that it burns up the insulation, and it just disintegrates over months, and it falls to the ground, and UV light from the sun destroys it. So in the last few decades, they are, especially the high power transmission lines, but even the neighborhood distribution lines, primary and secondary, they're just not insulating them anymore. They're leaving them bare. But so they can't have them together unless they're insulated. So if they're bare, they have to keep them apart, 6 feet or so that the wind doesn't knock them together. Because if they touch, they'll short out, and then they'll trip the breaker and plunge at the substation and plunge the whole neighborhood into darkness. But even if they get close enough for arcing to occur, especially in more moist air, then that'll also trip the breaker. So they have to be far enough apart that the wind will not knock them together. And then there goes your cancellation. So when you start pulling these wires apart, the magnetic field that surrounds them, which can go dozens of feet into, and it goes right through walls, right through ceilings, into homes. We can't shield it. Not a field that's that big. then there's nothing we can do about it. And it ebbs and flows. It'll be lower in the daytime and lower at night, highest in the evening when everyone's home in residential neighborhoods and turns on their lights and cooking and laundry and such. And then it drops lowest overnight and then back up in the morning. And it's also all of that, the diurnal change from day to night is all lifted up higher in the summertime when there's air conditioning use. It's hot and you run air conditioning 24/7, then
Right.
the whole curve goes up. So whatever you measure on a given day and a given part of the year, bear in mind that the number could be higher or lower depending on what time of day you're thinking about, and at that same distance from the wire, from the lines, and also a different part of the year, it can be different.
Right.
So,
Right.
so now the other thing that can happen in a residential neighborhood, so it's not good to live near high tension power lines. And if you really want to know, you just have to get a Gauss meter or hire somebody from the building biology profession. Now, my website is createhealthyhomes.com. So you see the name of my business, just put it together with no space between the words and put a .com at the end, and that's my website. But you can also go to buildingbiologyinstitute.org. And buildingbiologyinstitute.org is the website for the Building Biology Institute. And then you can go at the top to find an expert and then click on certified consultants and then click on electromagnetic radiation specialist, like again, those letters after my name there, to start with. And then you'll see all of our practitioners alphabetized by state, and then Canada is all under C. And find somebody in your area and hire them to come to your house and do these measurements for you. And some of us do long distance evaluations over the phone as well, where we guide you to get your own meters, and then you can test yourself and then tell me the data, and then we figure out what to do. So in residential neighborhoods, most of the time, the magnetic field that you might have if you have power lines along the back of your backyard, for two rows of houses on different streets that back up to each other, there'll be power lines along that backyard there.
Right.
So you'll measure a magnetic field in the back third of your backyard, but by the time you get halfway or a third of the way towards your house, it dissipates. And then it's low and it stays low till you get to your house, and it's low through your house, you're fine. But there are some neighborhoods where it's high, very high under the power lines, and it's still high when I get to the back of the house, and I can still measure a magnetic field above 1 milligauss, which is our safe limit, in the house from the power line. And if I walk around inside of a house and I get 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 milligauss in there, that's not good. Something's wrong. And I'll look around, I'll look out the window for the overhead power lines, and I'll say, all right, I see them in the backyard, or I'll see them on the street, whichever they are. And I walk in that house towards the part of the house, the front or the back, where the power lines are, and the number steadily goes up, and I'm in the room, and everywhere I move my meter, high, low, left, right, front, back, I get virtually the same number. That's a power line.
Yeah.
And so I go there and I walk out the door, and I'm towards the power lines, and it's higher, and then I turn around and come back, and it goes slower, lower, slowly, and I get to that front door if they're on the street, and I'm at 4 milligauss. I'm not down to 1 yet, and I go into the house, and I keep going from there, or I go to the side of the house and go just from the front yard to the side yard to the backyard, past the house. I get the same number outside as I do inside. That's a power line, and there's nothing we can do about that.
Yeah.
Unless there's a broken neutral in a house in the neighborhood, and we are able to fix that. Hopefully, and I have done this a few times, get the utility to find that and fix it. It's not always possible. But
it sounds like what you're saying too, though, is that if you're living like literally almost underneath these power lines, that's where you're most affected. But I guess from what it sounds like too, is that this emission of this radiation dissipates as you get further away from being directly underneath that power line. Is that correct?
Linearly. It's like 1 over R or 1 over R squared.
Right.
Now you get a 1 over R cubed reduction when you move away from a point source of magnetic field. It's one of the indoor sources, which I haven't mentioned, which is motors and transformers. Those have very high magnetic field, like the fan motor of an air purifier, for instance.
Oh, okay.
Or a fan. or under your feet at your desk, the uninterrupted power supply, that battery backup, or a base unit for a speaker system for your computer. Those all have very high magnetic field levels. Or even these transformers that you plug in. Some of them, the old wire wound ones, they have big magnetic fields that can go out 1 or 2 feet. The new switch mode power supplies don't. No magnetic fields, but they have dirty electricity. So the point is, there are point sources throughout the house and from the breaker panel, where that is, the refrigerator motor. So you don't want to have a bed or a couch or a chair on the back side of a refrigerator, because that's going to come on every 20 minutes and have a magnetic field that comes out 2 or 3 feet into the room in all directions. It generally doesn't reach the front of the refrigerator where you stand, occasionally, depending on the design of the motor. So those are point sources. Now, transformers for the neighborhood, that's a big transformer, and it could be in a green box on the ground or even underground, or in a gray can up on the utility pole. But the magnetic field from that drops off within 4 or 5 feet.
Oh, okay.
And I know this because I don't go up the poles, but if I'm in a neighborhood with underground power lines and there's the green box and someone calls me and it's on the corner of their property and they're worried about it, they either live there or they want to buy the house. So I come out and I know what I'm going to find. I tell them it's not going to be a problem. And so I take my Gauss meter and I go right up and I put it right on top of the green box. And it's 200-300 millivolts, but within 1 foot, it's down to 64.
Oh, okay.
And then 2 feet it's down to 12, 3 feet it's down to 2, and 4 feet it's down to 0.3, which is the ambient level for the yard and the house. So that magnetic field for that transformer up on the pole is dissipates before you. If you climbed up that pole and carried a Gauss meter, you wouldn't measure an increase until you got 3/4 of the way up that pole within 4 or 5 feet of that. Transformer.
So what about someone who lives underneath or close to a cell phone tower?
That's a whole different situation.
So tell the viewers and listeners a little bit about that.
Okay. So radio frequencies, as opposed to magnetic fields, radio frequencies are designed to transmit because they carry the information that you're getting, that you're transmitting, either receiving and transmitting. So we talk about voice calls, we talk about texts, emails, web surfing, and then streaming TV. And then you've got baby monitors, surveillance cameras, thermostats, everything that's wireless in homes now. And they're putting Wi-Fi devices and apps in tennis rackets and toothbrushes and babies' diapers. And so that when your baby's diaper gets wet, you get a message on your phone to let you know because of an app. I mean, I'm not kidding. It's just everybody is putting Wi-Fi and Bluetooth into everything that they make and sell. So it's a minefield for anybody who is sensitive. Now, research shows that every human being and animal and insects, I mean, the whole of the biosphere is being affected by radio transmissions now. And one of the good resources for this is Generation Zapped, which is a documentary that was put together by a client of mine here in Hollywood, Sabine Gemayel. And she interviews a gentleman from Sweden, and his name is Ola Johansson, one of the professors there. And he says that we have now increased the radio frequency presence by quintillionth, relative to what it used to be. And I may have the wording of exactly how he phrased that wrong, but we have many orders of magnitude of invisible, silent, and odorless radio frequencies permeating our living space compared to just a few decades ago. Now, the strength of the radio frequency signal drops off exponentially from every transmitter, whether it's a radio transmitter on the top of a mountain like we have here in Los Angeles, or top of a building or a tower in places that don't have the mountains. So radio stations have put out 50,000 watts of energy to transmit that signal through the air, and they shape where they want to send it in terms of the population. And AM is more to the ground in terms of its amplitude modulation. FM is frequency modulation, and that's line of sight. And TV is the same way, line of sight. And so that we've had that for 100 years, 80 years since 1920. But this came out of the Army in the 1950s and 60s, and then certain companies wanted to commercialize it, and they did. And so these are transmitters as well as receivers. Mm-hmm. So in a typical cell phone, you have 6 antennas. You have the voice and the data are at the frequencies that have been purchased by Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T, and now Dish, which is the fourth company. Sprint got absorbed by T-Mobile. And so in each city, they have specific frequencies, generally in the 600 megahertz, 700 megahertz, 850, 900, 1800, 1900, 21, 23, 25, 2700. That's the range of fourth generation long-term evolution, 4G LTE. And 4G is just a marketing tool or basket phrase, and also something that the cell industry uses when it's talking to customers. But the radio engineers who design all this stuff, they don't talk in terms of 3G, 4G, 5G, 6G. They talk about release 15, 16, 17, 18. And this is from the third generation partnership program, 3GPP, which is a consortium of the world's cell companies that have committees. And this is all on my website, createhealthyhomes.com. You click on education, where all the articles are, and in the welcome page, right in the middle there, safer use of cell phones, 5G, safer use of computers. I have these articles, featured articles, and then there's also a menu there. You'll see the 5G. I have a whole article on 5G, on fifth generation cell technology. And I can talk about that because I have a new meter here to supplement another meter that I've had for 6 months from Brian Hoyer from Shielded Healing. And this just came out from Safe Living Technologies from Rob Metzinger, who's a colleague of mine, and I teach with him in the building biology profession. And so these two meters measure the millimeter wave 5G, which is up in the high band of 28 and 39 gigahertz. This one measures both of those. This one measures the 28 gigahertz. And then you have other meters like this one, which has been around for a few years, Safe and Sound Pro 2. And then there's a little one called the Classic 2, which measures in the 4G and the low band 5G, in the low band and mid band frequencies from 200 megahertz to 8 gigahertz. And then we also have other meters like this one. This is a gigahertz solutions meter that has basically the same frequency range as this one does.
Yeah.
So these generations, James, have to do with the decade during which technology was deployed. So when technology for cell phones first came out in the 1980s, it was called first generation. And that was, so anything that was deployed in terms of the technology for the radio, and then the shaping of the signal and the broadcast of the signal to the antenna, all of that, all the physics involved with that was called first generation technology. And then you had receivers in your cell phone at that time, which was only voice. And then second generation was in the 90s, and that added text. That's it. That's all you had. Third generation was the 2000s, that first decade okay. And that added web access. And then fourth generation, which is just the last decade we just finished, enhanced that in terms of making it faster and a lot of advancements with that. And it turns out that all these generations overlap each other. It's not like everything that was deployed in the 1990s stopped working and a whole new set of equipment started working on January 1st of 2000. And actually, this transition tends to occur in the 8th year of a decade now. So in 2008, that's when we started getting 4G. And 2018 was when we started getting the deployment of 5G. And the deployment of 6G will come in 2028 generally. But what we have, like when you have the deployment of 4G equipment, 3G is still there, and 2G for that matter. Now they're phasing out to second, and all the stuff that they implemented in the 1990s is being phased out and replaced. So it won't even be supported anymore on a phone that's older. That 2G is going away, and 3G is being phased out as well. But 4G, that's still the predominant technology. All that stuff that was deployed in the 2010s is still with us and will be with us for another 20 years. And it's still the bulk. 5G is a small percentage.
Yeah.
So 5G is what has been deployed since 2018.
Right.
And so these releases, release 15, 16, 17, 18. If you look at the list, and I talk about this in my 5G article, you're talking about technologies that change with each generation, like standalone technology versus non-standalone, massive MIMO versus multiple input, multiple output, in terms of how many antennas they have, and the beamforming technology they have to use for the high band 5G, as opposed to the mid-band and low-band 5G, which is mixed in with 4G, actually, and a little bit higher than 4G in the mid-band. So the question is not what is the number. The question is, as far as we're concerned, as building biologists and others like Brian Hoyer and Shielded Healing, who's an expert on this, and all the engineers that we know, Alistair Phillips in England, who invented the acoustimeter, and Trevor Marshall, who lives here in Southern California, and engineers in Israel. There's some prominent engineers who are with our group, and we know each other, and we interact and we learn from each other. As far as we're concerned, what's most important is what are the technologies, and there's dozens of them, 24 of them, and they're modulating the signal more and more. Even 4G, which is the predominant technology used for data and voice, still. I mean, the amount of 5G in the millimeter wave is still 1%.
When you say modulating, what do you mean by that?
The shape, okay, good question. It's the shaping of the signal in the radio before it's transmitted, and then how is it transmitted? Even 4G and low band and mid band 5G, because 4G is all in the low and mid band. That means 600 megahertz to 1 gigahertz or 1,000 megahertz. That's the low band. The mid band is technically defined as any transmission from 1 gigahertz to 6 gigahertz. Now, there's a lot of transmissions from 6 gigahertz all the way up to 20, which is the beginning of the high band, the millimeter wave band, which is called the millimeter wave band because the wavelength is a few millimeters, 3 to 5 millimeters. It's a half an inch. But the wavelength down in the 4G low and mid band and low band 5G down there is 15 inches down at 600 megahertz. And then it gets smaller, closer together as you get more of them per second. And so when you get up to 2.4 gigahertz, that's 5 inches. And then the mid-band, which is 3.5 to 4.2 gigahertz, that's now down to 2 inches. And the wavelength determines whether the signal will get through a wall. So all 4G gets through walls, that wall out here, and windows. 5G, I have found out, in the millimeter wave, does not go through walls. It does go through glass.
Why is that?
Because of the wavelength. It's just the physics of it. If you understand the physics, then see. So we are applying the physics. We're learning from the industry. I have been to all 3 5G conferences that the Mobile World Congress or another organization put on, called the Mobile World Congress America, and then they renamed it Mobile World Congress Los Angeles. They moved it from Silicon Valley to Los Angeles in 2018. I spent 2 days there in the LA Convention Center where they have the car show, and been there for that. And then I went back for the 5G conference, and I wandered around, and well, I didn't wander. I mean, I said, well, so I went to all 4 antenna manufacturer booths, Ericsson, Nokia, Motorola, and Samsung. And I spent hours, 2 days, asking these guys question after question after question, picking their brain, because they were just standing there talking to people. And yeah, I'd listen in on other conversations because they're all engineers, or they know what engineers know, and they're talking to engineers from the cell companies. And I'm listening to the conversations and learning from it. And then I go to webinars now, and I went to the lectures that they had. I did that in 2019, didn't have it in 2020 because of COVID. Came back in 2021, went to that. And then last year, they had it the same week that I taught for my profession, and they moved it to Las Vegas, so I couldn't go. This year, it's still in Las Vegas. I'm going in late September for 2 days with a couple of colleagues from my profession. And it's in that setting that I get to ask these guys, how does this work? What is the difference? What are the mechanics? What are the physics of it? And that's what's important, because people constantly ask us as building biologists, what is my risk? How is this 5G or all of this going to affect me? Now, we know this. This is well discussed in the 5G literature, both podcasts, interviews like you're doing, articles, and testimonials from individuals who don't know the physics, but they know what they experience, and they know how they could tolerate the 4G Verizon cell tower in their neighborhood. They could walk out there, and then they say the truck came along a couple of years ago, did something, and they said, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I'm putting 5G up there." And now these people who are electrically hypersensitive, EHS, they can't go out and take a walk anymore. They react. Or maybe the guy says, "We're just upgrading our 4G equipment," and they can't go out there because it's now 4G advanced. That's where the modulation comes in. So
Yes.
they change the signal.
So what are some of the health effects, though, of this? I mean, there's got to be some kind of consequences to all this upgrading and more powerful transmission of these radio frequencies, right?
Oh, yes, yes.
So what are some of them? You hear about cancer, brain tumors a lot.
Okay. So there are organizations. I'll start with a new one, the International Commission for the Biological Effects of EMFs, ICBE. Anyway, and International Commission for the Biological Effects of EMFs. So yes, ICBE. I think there's a dash in there, EMF.com or .org. And this is an organization, Libby Kelly in Tucson, and a number of other people have put together to be a resource, in terms of studies and research. Another one is Environmental Health Trust. So ehtrust.org, I think, is their website. Environmental Health Trust. Again, that's an excellent compendium of research studies. And there are many, many others that are out there that have been in existence for years, documenting the studies, thousands of studies by researchers, mostly outside the United States, who are documenting the health effects. And they have a whole list of them. The Bio Initiative Working Group put out a report in 2007 at bioinitiative.org.
Right.
All one word, bioinitiative. You have to spell it correctly. And then they upgraded that. They first released it in 2007. Then they spent another 5 to 6 years looking at more research that was just coming out, and there's quite a bit of it every year. And so they put out an update in 2012, 2014, and they have a colored chart, 4.5 page chart that has all not all of it, just sample research at levels below the level that the FCC, Federal Communications Commission in the United States, says is safe. And they no, it's not safe. Look at all these studies, and they color coded it by organ system in the body: cardiac, respiratory, digestive, endocrine, neurological, reproductive, all these different organ systems. Other people have done a great job. I won't repeat them, what they've said, because you have other resources that cover that. I'd like to spend more time on how to understand this properly and how to assess it with the different meters, and then how to
I'll have you on again. Yeah, we'll talk about that in the next episode on that. We'll even do this as a second 2-part series, probably, more than likely.
Happy to. So there are many. Now so let me just give you some information that most people are not hearing from the EMF community, and I say this with support, with respect, with love, because I'm not sensitive myself, just as an aside, but half of my clients are. So everyone is affected on a cellular level, even with a 2-minute call. There's heat shock proteins, DNA damage, damage to DNA when it unfurls and it's ready and it's transcribing. RNA damage, mitochondrial damage. All of this happens on a cellular level when you're in close proximity to a radio transmitter. It could be an earbud, it could be the cell phone next to your head, or even in front of you here, because it's not 1 million or 2 million pulsing, 500,000 to 1 million. You'll get numbers like that when if I turn this on, and and then
Oram, how much are some of those meters with the audience? Share with them the average price of some of those. How much can they, and where can they purchase those?
SLT.com, Safe Living Technologies, actually type in safelivingtechnologies.com, all one word.
Right.
And then they have, so this is $380. And you can buy it in 4 installments, by the way.
Right.
And that's US dollars. This is brand new. I'm one of the beta testers, and I got this 2.5 weeks ago, and I've been testing it here in Los Angeles, Santa Monica, Los Angeles, and I've seen 4 or 5 installations now. This is $890 or $900. Now, and there's also the FM5, and I've had Brian Hoyer, bless his heart, he's really been educating people along with Nick Pinot, and they lecture together, they work together, they have workshops and seminars.
Right.
And he gifted this to me, $1,000 meter 6 months ago. So kudos to him. And I've been using it, and I haven't really found. That's the point. A lot of my clients' homes in suburban neighborhoods, they keep reading, well, we're going to have 5G in front of every third house.
Right.
Well, that's what the industry says would be needed, because the wavelength is so short that the good reception of 5G peters off within a block. And I've demonstrated that in the last 2 weeks with this thing and this thing, because I'm now finding them. Because before I kept going, when I go to clients' houses, James, this is like nothing. It's not rising. It's not high. This is always is, but to varying degrees. But this because there are no millimeter wave transmitters in front of many suburban streets and homes. Okay. Now there's the C band, and there's 4G small cell antennas, but not millimeter wave, which is all that this is. Now you can configure this to measure the mid band and low band, which it's possible to do as well on this meter. But I have this already, so this is what I use for those bands where the 4G is, and the low band and mid band 5G. But the value that I've had for this for the last 6 months is my clients. I'm saying I'm not finding it, and they say, "Oh, I'm so glad," because I was worried that it might be, because I heard every third house is having it. I said, no, that doesn't mean that they're going to put it there. Just because they say it should doesn't mean they're going to put it there, because it's tens of thousands of dollars per array to put up a 5G millimeter wave, which only goes. It's mostly an outdoor phenomenon. Where they put them, and so far in the last 2 weeks, where I've found it with this meter is on heavily traveled streets where there's high pedestrian traffic. But you get a block in on either side to the residential neighborhood, you don't get it from this. And even when I put these side by side, and there's a 4G and a 5 millimeter wave 5G, and 4G and millimeter wave 5G array together, this guy will show half a million microwatts per meter squared, just across the street. Right. And this will show 100, maybe 1,000. That's it. So the RF density is much higher in the 4G realm, in the low and mid band, including the low band and mid band 5G, which it's there, more modulated, and it's harmful. And that's the thing I want people to know. Whereas the millimeter wave, which we've been hearing about, the phased array beamformed signals, are not as prevalent as people think. What's really of concern is the cell industry running out of bandwidth for the legacy macro towers that like, especially the 4G, that's still the bulk, the backbone of data transmission, which goes out for a mile and a half reliably, and it's always on. 4G is always on. It's always there, whether it's 800 to 1,000 watts from a big legacy tower. You know what those look like, the tall, skinny ones. Yeah. Or they'll put a shorter one that goes into a neighborhood. It might be 100 watts or 400 watts, but that's always on, right in front of houses. That's not good. But what also, and then the C band is in the mid band, and it's mixed in now, and that's always on too. Now the millimeter wave band is still to this day primarily restricted to commercial areas and heavily traveled streets, and that's where it is. And Verizon's the company that's been doing it. T-Mobile hasn't expanded because when they acquired Sprint, they got their 2.5 gigahertz mid-band signal, which has been around for 5 years, and that's fast enough. That's 10 times faster than 4G, and all their customers are happy with it. And Verizon didn't have any of that, so Verizon outbid AT&T for the C-band, which is 3.5 to 4.2, which is the sweet spot because it's a wavelength that can go through buildings, but it can be, it's instead of 12 to 48 megabits per second, which is where all 4G is, it's in the low band and the lower mid band. This upper mid band is in 250, 180 to 250 megabits per second. That's 10 times faster, and people notice that with the C-band from Verizon. And then AT&T has some of the C-band, and then there's the Citizens Broadcast Radio Service, which is 3.4 to 3.5. That's coming online later this year. So the big thing that people need to take away from this is, and I discuss this on my website in an update, the 5G, is everybody who talks about 5G, in my opinion, in the EMF community, should say it's harmful. There are three kinds of 5G. There's high band. Yes, that's harmful, but it's more restricted to these high density urban areas and a little bit into the suburbs, but on heavily traveled roads. But then there's mid band and low band 5G mixed in with 4G. But really what you need to pay attention to as much is your exposure to your own devices, which has the same energy transmitting in your personal space, whether it's next to your head or in your pockets.
That was my next question: is how do you minimize the EMF exposure on these radio frequencies and magnetic frequencies?
Okay, you have to think inside versus outdoors, and the rule of thumb in both cases is reduce use, increase distance, and favor hardwired connections. So what my clients who call me up, who say I'm electrically sensitive and I've done everything that I know to do, that I've read in the general EMF literature, I've opted out of my smart meter, I shut my Wi-Fi off at night, and I'm hardwired from my principal computer, and I put chips and pendants and stickers on my phone, which have some benefit.
They do work, those chips and pendants, those like dots things that you put on your computer. I have one of them on my Wi-Fi device and on my it's called Power Guard.
Okay,
those things work.
It depends on your definition of work. Do they work? And the answer is it depends on how you look at it. So here's my analysis and my profession's analysis. First of all, for the vast majority of them, and there's only one that I can remember that baffled us because it did change. But for all of them, there's no change in our meters.
Oh,
but that's not how they work. The way they work, however it is, whatever the technology is those chips change the way the human physiology responds to the radio frequency affecting it. So what you see is a reduction in DNA damage. So they had 2 cages of rats. Well, first of all, they had a cage with no cell phone. Then they put a cell phone over this one. And they did document DNA damage for these rats. That didn't occur here, more so. I mean, this is just a control. There's really not much going on. But there was some DNA damage here. Then they had two cages with both with the same cell phone, but one had the chip and the other one didn't. There was less DNA damage to the rats in the cage that had the chip than the one that didn't. So that's real. That's not psychological or psychosomatic or power suggestion. That's a real phenomenon that was documented with DNA damage, and that has been replicated by other studies. Thermography.
So what you're saying is those chips do absorb some of these.
No, it's not absorbing. Through some quantum mechanical coherence generating property.
Right.
That is not understood by modern physics. It's quantum physics, whatever that means. I mean, that goes back, a century with Einstein, and the Russians are way ahead of us on this, and the Germans, for that matter, with their understanding of quantum physics, and it gets into chakras and subtle energies, which I'm a big fan of, and I know a fair amount about. So that's why I'm open to this, and I'm open to results. I'm open to data. I'm open to people's experiences, and thousands of people report they feel better when they use these chips. So I say to my colleagues, some of the engineers, most of my colleagues who I teach with, they're open. And we have a policy statement on the building biology website, and I have one on my own website. And I help create the wording of the one on the building biology website about these subtle energy devices, which is we're neutral about them. We always say find the sources in your home and get rid of them first. Because if you have 4 ashtrays with burning lit cigarettes, filling your room with smoke, and a guy comes along and says, buy my air purifier, it will reduce the smoke. It does. He's not wrong. But there's still smoke being generated by the ashtrays. We know how to find the ashtrays, and that's not easy to do in many cases.
Right.
We can find, because all of these EMFs are they're not like cigarette smoke that you could see and smell that I grew up with in the 50s and 60s when I was a kid. I remember that, and I didn't like it. But I have, you have no idea that the frequencies are here until I turn this thing on, and then it's huge. And I turn it off, and they say, what Wi-Fi? I don't hear any Wi-Fi. Well, it's there. You just don't know it unless you feel it or you use a meter that shows it. Okay. And so then so for the electrically sensitive people, they need to be hardwired. They need to follow these recommendations. For those who are asymptomatic, it's a matter of risk ratio or risk. What is your risk of developing symptoms? We don't know. You may go through life and never have symptoms. But in terms of these chips, we say get a building biology or evaluation, or an evaluation by somebody, Shielded Healing or GeoVital or these other. There are a few other people who train people to. Chris Anderson, and I think that's his name, electrician in Tucson, and Michael Newart out in San Francisco. He trained some people who learn how to assess homes for EMFs. And you go to buildingbiologyinstitute.org, you go to find an expert. We have a whole list. The German building biology profession has people in Europe and Australia and New Zealand who know how to do this work. And then get an assessment or get some meters and just read our websites and follow this as much as you can yourself, or call us up and we'll help you long distance. And then reduce your exposure, and then you can still put a chip on here. I'm fine with that. I have no problem with that. But as an adjunct, not as your sole or exclusive way of
minimizing it. Yeah.
That's all attitude.
It's interesting. My question to you too is, I know this thing with electric cars. Have you used any of those meters with electric cars and being inside of an electric car? And how much? Oh, you do?
Oh yeah, I love it.
And they don't emit. They don't emit.
James, I get 113 miles per gallon now.
Well, that's all good, but I guess my question is,
there's got to be Prime, and I can drive anywhere. I have no restrictions on that.
But I'm saying, is it emitting anything?
Oh yeah. Well, actually, okay, depends. Cars are a whole other topic. All 4 EMFs are in there, and they don't follow the same rules that they do in houses. It's a different wiring structure and a whole different environment. Okay, so first of all, when I'm in the first 30 miles, it's on battery. I charge it up, and then it switches over to the gas because it's a hybrid. And
I'm talking about not a hybrid, but I'm talking about
all right. But when I'm the first 30 miles, it is an electric car. It's like a Tesla, or a Leaf, or all these other pure electric cars that are on the market now. And there's 0 magnetic fields, no AC magnetic fields at all, anywhere in my car. Now, when the engine kicks on, guess what? There are myths and misunderstandings, and I say this with a lot of love and support, that float around in the EMF community just because people who are suffering, they're not engineers, they're not trained, they don't understand the physics. They just know that they hurt, and that they found a way to reduce their symptoms, and that's great. And then they write about it. And then other people who are electrically sensitive read that and say, oh, I can do the same, or that applies to me. But it turns out they have a different smart meter brand. They have different sources of EMFs, and it's not the same as the other person. And they make conclusions so they're overgeneralizing, and they're doing their best to understand a very complicated topic. So we do our best to help sort it all out and just look at each home individually and come up with a whole list of assessment and mitigation strategies that apply to that particular home, and go with that for that person. And that's what everyone should do. So, but anyway, one of the myths is that gasoline powered cars, or whatever we've been driving all these years, is fine, and battery powered cars, pure electric cars, are full of EMFs. Guess what? It's exactly the opposite. All gasoline engines have high magnetic fields. From what? From the alternator and the way that the electric circuit it's mostly 24 volts DC, by the way, which you can't even measure with an AC Gauss meter. But there is it's 80 volts AC, I'm told, and it can even vary in my car. The voltage varies, the AC voltage. But the way that they've arranged it is that the hot wire comes out and then it goes along, on the, like, for instance, in one car, this one guy in our profession demonstrated this to us. He took some readings in our monthly study group within our profession, and he said, look, the hot wire is going right across the firewall on the engine side of the firewall, right where your legs are for the driver and the passenger, and they don't have a neutral wire. They use the grounding system of the whole car, the chassis of the car, as the return path back to the battery or back to the alternator. Excuse me. There's no cancellation whatsoever. That's why there's huge magnetic fields coming through the firewall where your feet are in a gasoline-powered car. Now, when you're driving a pure electric car, you don't have that. It's all DC, and this thing shows nothing. It's not a harm. It's not until the gasoline engine kicks on in my car, and then this goes up.
And then you go back into your house where you're exposed to everything. Then,
well, no, pretty low here where I live. I make sure of that, So
I guess, yeah, I know we're going into a technological world where there's this term called Internet of Things, meaning these smart homes. To me, it seems as though we're getting into a area where you're increasing your exposure to a lot of these radio frequencies and magnetic frequencies. And there's also a term called Internet of Bodies, which they use these RF chips that are going to be inserted. And there's a couple companies, publicly traded companies, that's already using this technology out of Sweden for Internet of Bodies, which is these RF chips. And you start talking about these chips that get inserted, right, with quantum, they call them quantum tattoos, quantum computing, that, again, like you were saying earlier from the very beginning of this episode, with the transmission of data, because that's what this is all about at the end of the day, is transmission of data.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I had done some research and reading on, going down that rabbit hole of Internet of Bodies and quantum tattoos, is Rice University did some research, and I'm actually going to even be doing an upcoming episode on that, more than likely a solo podcast episode on it, on quantum tattoos. But it was being, like I said, the research was being done at Rice University, and it talks about putting data on these quantum tattoos that go underneath the skin using luciferase dye, and for vaccine passports. So this was all research that was done, pre-COVID. We also talked about central bank digital currency and the use of this technology to basically put all your banking information on, and put, your vaccine passports and your medical data, and all that stuff can be stored.
Yeah, biodata, yeah.
Biodata with a chip that's inserted in you.
Right.
To me, from what you're saying with radio frequency, I mean, once you have a chip inserted in you, a radio frequency chip, there's no reversing that. And that, to me, sounds very damaging health-wise, and even a lot of of course, obviously privacy and legal issues as well. So, I mean, if that's something that's going to come to fruition anytime soon, what do you foresee in terms of health consequences to that?
So the application of that technology and what it does to our privacy and deep state government control over people, both nationally and internationally, is enormously concerning for all the reasons you just mentioned. There are many people who are bringing that to our attention, and we need to pay attention to that and oppose it. From a technological standpoint, to answer your question.
Based on your technology and your research in your industry, putting something like that in somebody that's irreversible, I mean, what kind of exposure am I receiving if I have a radio frequency device in my, in between my thumb and my forefinger?
Well, I've got news for you. We're already a decade or two into that in terms of the equivalency of the what it would be like
Right.
if you realize that uh, these things would be transmitting, and what we don't know is whether it be constant or intermittent or just when it's triggered, and that has to do with battery life.
Right.
But we already have a situation, James, where the whole population now has a radio transmitter in their pocket,
Yeah,
in
no,
their
I know. But
arm.
at least I can take this thing and throw it in the ocean by
Yeah,
my house here.
But James, I hear that every day. But do you? No, no.
No.
All right, let's take you out of the equation. But the average person out there, they have this with my clients here in LA. Everywhere I go to the grocery store. I was driving down the street, and I'm paying more attention. I should have done that all these months with this thing. Sorry, out the window. But now I'm putting this out the window. And I'm driving around, and I'm realizing there is more 5G millimeter wave exposure than I thought. But while I was doing that, I happened to notice all these people walking by. Everyone, James,
Has a cell phone.
right? Everyone. Every single person. It's in their hand. It's in their pocket. They're talking, they're talking, and their hands are, and they have an earbud.
Right.
So the earbud is connecting by Bluetooth to their phone, and then the phone's connecting to the cell tower, and their phone's in their pocket. But here's the thing: their brain is now getting irradiated by the Bluetooth, by the earbud, and people walk around with that thing in their ear all day long.
They do, right? My wife does that too.
Okay, and then they have this in their pocket all day long.
Yeah.
So James, and this is much more powerful than any tattoo ever will be.
Let me repeat
that. Yes, I haven't even thought about it before till you mentioned it, but I'm telling you, the power density of a tattoo. This has the capacity for a battery in here, this has to. So,
well, they're talking about quantum computing too, which we're we're ratcheting it up even higher.
Here's the thing. It's really, really, really important for all of us in the EMF community, no matter what it is that we're talking about, to understand, to seek out the facts about the technology, how it behaves, how it transmits, constant, intermittent, what are the frequencies, what are the wavelengths, what is the power density, what is the modulation, the polarization, digitization of the signal based on, standalone technology versus non-standalone, massive MIMO versus, 2T2R, 4T4R, 4G versus 5G. All of these changes, the densification, the 256 quadrature amplitude modulation versus the 64 that they've been using. What else? Just all these different things that are in release 15, 16, 17 from the 3GPP. That's what we need to pay attention to and focus on, because that explains what the effect is going to be on people. And then, is it close, or is it, where do people hold this? What's the power density at this distance and at this distance? All of this has to be taken into consideration. So when we talk about tattoos, wherever they are, or brain chips, or anything, things under the skin, like you do with dogs, or they want to put them in people, how much power are we talking about? What are the frequencies? What are the wavelengths?
But I think
gotta pay attention to that in terms of the health.
But I think the other thing too is the amount of control that somebody has at some command center over
James,
you.
I don't get into that.
No, I understand.
Other people do,
saying.
And I know it's very crucial. It's really important. I get that, but I'm overwhelmed. I can't keep up with the demand just for my services. People call me every day. I get emails, and probably from this podcast, I'm going to get a lot more. And that's just the way it goes. But so I respect that. But my contribution is to work with the engineers and to figure out what are the health impacts from the technology alone, from the radio transmissions of such a thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, we've got earbuds, we've got these in our pockets. And then more than that, there's medical devices that people are wearing now.
Yeah. Fitbits.
Well, that too. Your Fitbit and your iWatch, your Apple Watch, those things constantly transmit. Now you can put them in airplane mode, at least the Apple You can
Right.
turn on, just like it has the same it
Sure.
looks like it has the same operating system as an iPhone. So you can bring up airplane mode, and you've got to make sure that when you put your whatever in airplane mode,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's an Android or an iPhone, that you have to make sure that Wi-Fi and Bluetooth are OFF, not connected, not the same. It's still transmitting. OFF, and then it's not transmitting. And then you need to get a meter, either this one or its baby brother, the Safe and Sound Classic 2, Roman numeral 2, and get and then, because that's only $155.
Oh, okay.
And the only difference is it has the same quality of radio, same sensitivity of the radio receiver or the radio measuring,
Frequency. Right.
and has a speaker, the same quality of sound, just a little bit smaller speaker, but it has the LED lights, and then it has numbers of microwatts per meter squared for each light. It just doesn't have a display. You don't actually see numbers on there like you do here.
Yeah.
But you can tell,
Yeah.
And by the way, I put in I have a wireless access point across the room there. That's what you're hearing here.
What is that transmitting? The your speaker and
Wi-Fi.
the Wi-Fi?
And so this is what Wi-Fi sounds like. Tick, 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 tick.
Oh, really?
Okay. Now let me turn that off. Okay. Now,
you sure that's not aliens?
now this is
You sure that's not aliens there, Oram?
I hope I don't have aliens in my house. You know what? My Frontier fiber internet ONT box, optical network transfer, is down here. It has a transmitter that I can't turn off. My router's over here. I've got that turned off, and there's no Wi-Fi in anything on my desk here. It's all hardwired. But I have fiber internet down here, and I can't turn that thing off, and that's right in my room. And I've got it doubly shielded, so that's why I still have some RF here.
Let me ask you a question. When you hardwire to your Wi-Fi, right? How much does that minimize the radio frequency?
Okay, good question. People will plug in an Ethernet cable to their laptop,
right,
to their desktop, or even with an adapter to their phone or iPad, but particularly a laptop. James, let's just talk about that.
Laptop.
And I'll come to the home and I'll turn this on, and it's transmitted on their laptop, and they say, "Oram, what's that sound?" I say, "It's your Wi-Fi." "On what?" On your laptop right in front of you.
Right.
And they say, "No, I have an Ethernet." I said, "I see that." And then I ask them, "Did you turn off the Wi-Fi when you plugged this in?" They said, "No, was I supposed to?" "Where did you learn that?" "Yes, you have to." And they said, "But I assumed that plugging this in turns off the Wi-Fi automatically."
No.
You must do that manually.
But it does minimize it completely?
Well, it eliminates it completely. Yes. It's either off or off.
So Wi-Fi, sitting with your Wi-Fi by your laptop, if it's across from, like in this case, it's across from me on Wi-Fi, that would help a lot with minimizing the amount of radiation that's coming off of the Wi-Fi then, is what you're saying.
But there's two Wi-Fis, James. There's the Wi-Fi from the router, wherever it's located in the house, and then there's the Wi-Fi from the device. So in every family, I have to find out who lives there, how many people, who's the sensitive one. It's usually the person who calls me. Do they have other people in the house, and how much, to what extent are they on board with all this? Now, if the person who calls me is sensitive enough that they really need to not have any Wi-Fi, any RF in the house, that's the most, and there's another person who lives there or more in the family. And so that's the biggest challenge. And I say that because if that other person is not on board, then my client's not going to get well beyond a certain point.
Right.
Because what I'll do is I will isolate them as much as possible. I'll say, now, first of all, at night, when you're all sleeping, you can turn the Wi-Fi off, and we have ways of doing that. Because nobody needs it, and hopefully not. They have a Ring doorbell and surveillance cameras, and they come up with all sorts of reasons why it's got to stay on, and they just keep throwing one roadblock in front of another. And I said, okay, you've got to make some choices here,
right?
But my husband put in all this technology. I said, well, let's get him, let me explain all this to him, and he's going to have to make some changes and go back to the way it was 10 years ago when we didn't have some of these like Ring doorbell and Simply Safe and all that stuff, which is all just
electric cars.
Plug and play. Well, electric cars they're better. The big thing about electric cars.
No, they're not. I like gas, Oram. I'm sticking with gas. I'm old school. I still write checks.
Me too. I still have all of my appointments are still in a
yeah, there you go.
So I'm old school too. But the electric cars have they have radar, they have Bluetooth, they have Wi-Fi. Sometimes you can't turn that off. And then they also have lots of dirty electricity jams. And there are people who are really sensitive to that from the regenerative braking, because it is a Prius. It's a hybrid. So when I brake, even when I'm using the gas engine, it's charging up the batteries. So it flips back and forth. I mean, I can see it on the console. It's going back and forth from gas engine to electric, back, because it's a hybrid. It's still, it's not pure gas. Anyway.
Right.
So
I like hybrids. I like to get a hybrid. They're nice.
Yes, because I can go anywhere. I can go, 300 miles away if I need to. The first 30 is electric, but the next 270 is all gas. And I need a gas powered car for that. But
sure.
So to answer your question, you've got this transmitter, the Wi-Fi in one part of the house.
Right.
The person who's sensitive is in another room. I asked them during the day, where are you in the daytime? So then they tell me, well, I'm here, and my husband, who works from home, is in his office over there. So I just had this conversation with a client yesterday, who I was with on Monday, and they called me back and they need some clarification after ordering all the things that I recommended to them in terms of how to put it together, because they have to transition from Wi-Fi everywhere, which is assumed to be safe by the industry and therefore by the population. But I work with people for whom it is not safe, who have symptoms and who need to be isolated. So the wife is a counselor. She's on Zoom from her computer. She worked when COVID came. She transitioned from her office to her home, and she does everything over by Zoom. And she's stayed that way, and she's comfortable with that. And so that's all Wi-Fi, and she's symptomatic. And I think, well, here's why. And your electric fields are high from the cords here. And by the way, you need to have, the Ethernet cable needs to be grounded, and this one is. It's shielded and grounded. It's metal.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, she didn't have this. She had the thing at the end here, which the earlier models of laptops from the MacBooks put this in the box, and a lot of people didn't use it. They just put it in the drawer, and they used a little adapter that went on and had the two blades that swing out, and then they plug the transformer into the power strip or surge protector or the wall.
Mm-hmm.
But there's no ground, and so they put their hands on the computer while it's plugged in to that power supply, and I measure the body voltage readings with this body voltage meter. And then we have the various cords that come with that. And then the person is holding onto a cylinder here. It's plugged into this. And that's the best way to measure electric fields, which we haven't really talked about yet. But they're the most common EMF of all, electric fields. And
we'll talk about that next time. We'll do, like I said, a 2-part series on this, more on the physiology of all this stuff.
Well, but that's the unknown EMF. And you need to shut off breakers in homes that have plastic wiring in the wall, because the magnetic field will be low, but the electric field is high. But some of the meters that are on the market, and I say this, I love the Cornet and I love the Tri-Field TF2. They're great meters. And the Tri-Field TF2 is much more sensitive in radio frequency and electric field than the 100XE that they had a decade or two ago, the black box with the tan cover. It is a Tri-Field, and you turn the knob and you get to electric field and radio, and those are always very low. Now the new one, the Tri-Field 2, TF2, is much more sensitive, and I praise them. I give them kudos for that. Cornet is also very good, and I talk about this on my website. But I find that like if you have the body voltage meter from Less EMF, it's this one, and you get various cords that you plug into it. Right. This is only $89. Whereas my meter, that body voltage is built into this. It was designed by building biologists, for building biologists in Germany.
Yeah.
This is a $2,000 meter. It's 3-axis magnetic, 3-axis electric in the ungrounded mode, the freestanding mode. But then we also can measure body voltage with it as well. So this is what we use in our practices. But it's $2,000. Whereas this is the best way to measure electric fields where you sleep and at your desk for $89.
Yeah.
Less EMF. And there's one more cord that plugs in here and the other one here and here.
Right.
And you can do the same thing as the $2,000 meter over there for $89. And I have.
And where can the listeners and viewers find that again?
LESSEMF.com, and then just look up the body voltage meter.
And what is that again? Mention that.
Yes. LESSEMF.com.
So lessemf.com. Lessemf.com. Okay,
right.
Good.
Right.
Excellent. Well, like I said, I'd like to get you on again, and we could talk about more of the physiology, and you were talking about measuring. Let's do it. But I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for
you're welcome.
coming on to this episode of the Medical Truth Podcast. And again, where can the listeners and viewers find you again online?
So you'll see here, Create Healthy Homes. Create Healthy Homes. You put them together, take the spaces out, just those 3 words, right in a row, .com, and that's my website. And then when you're on that website, there's the homepage with a lot of information, but click on Education, and that takes you to the separate section with all the articles,
right,
all the way over to All About EMFs. You see the drop-down menu, click on EMFs. That takes you to a page with Introduction to EMFs, and a separate article on magnetic fields, electric fields, radio frequencies, dirty electricity, all about EMFs in the education section of createhealthyhomes.com. Safer use of computers, safer use of cell phones, 5G. It's all there in the education section. So, but thank you, James, very much.
Thank you so much, Oram. I
appreciate
appreciate
the opportunity to come and talk
Absolutely. We'll have you on again. Thanks.
You're welcome, James.
Thanks. All right.
Thanks for listening to the Medical Truth Podcast. For the latest episodes, go to www.medicaltruthpodcast.com. You can also find the Medical Truth Podcast on Rumble, as well as all the major podcast platforms like Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher, and iHeart.